We live in an era where being strong feels almost like an obligation, but strength, most of the time, is misunderstood. Being strong is not about carrying the weight of the world. It's about standing tall when no one else holds you up. The modern woman is taught to seek validation, likes, messages, affection, company, but there's a truth few dare to face. No one is coming to save you, and that's the beginning, not the end of your liberation. Socrates said that self-control is the true essence of freedom, and maybe he was right. The woman who learns to rise on her own discovers that self-love is the highest form of wisdom. Loneliness ceases to be a wound and becomes a source. The pain of absence turns into presence. However, the path to self-sufficiency is arduous. It demands that you look yourself in the eye, without masks, without excuses. That you abandon the comfort of emotional dependence and enter the dark cave of self-knowledge, where there is no echo, only the sound of your own voice. And what you'll discover inside may change everything you ever believed about strength, love, and freedom. We live surrounded by a lie disguised as comfort, the idea that we'll always need someone to complete, validate, or sustain us. This belief, nurtured since childhood, makes us prisoners of expectations. It's as if a woman could only bloom when a hand is extended, a presence to affirm her. But Socrates already warned, he who is not master of himself will always be a slave to another. And that's exactly what happens when we hand over our strength to others' approval. In daily life, we see it in every anxious glance at a message that never arrives, in every heart that waits for a compliment to feel enough. Emotional dependence disguises itself as love, but it's a subtle form of servitude. The constant search for external support drains inner clarity, exhausts emotional strength, and sabotages maturity. The woman who learns to rise alone understands that solitude is not punishment, it's process. It's the necessary silence where self-knowledge is revealed. The lack of support outside is often an invitation to discover the presence already within. Emotional independence is born when the fear of being alone gives way to the curiosity of self-discovery. But there's a price for this revelation: detachment. When you stop seeking outside what you already carry within, the world reacts. Some withdraw, others criticize. It's the cost of spiritual freedom, and few are willing to pay it. Still, it's in this voluntary isolation that true self-sufficiency is born. Ignorance is believing that strength comes from the outside. The consequence is living in the shadow of absences. The philosophical solution is simple and radical. Become whole before uniting with another. When you no longer need to be saved, love ceases to be refuge and becomes choice. The woman who walks alone discovers that solitude is merely the echo of her own power. And upon realizing this, she stops begging for support and begins to inspire. And you? Have you noticed how many times you waited to be saved when in fact you always held the key in your hands? Most people fear solitude as if it were a sentence. But Socrates said, "The soul that does not examine itself wanders in shadows." Solitude, therefore, is not shadow. It is light that doesn't blind, but reveals. It's in silence that a woman begins to hear the most important sound of all, her own conscience. When external voices fall silent, questions rise from within. Who am I without the eyes of others? What truly moves me? In the modern world, we run from that confrontation. We trade silence for notifications, introspection for distraction. We scroll through screens, searching for noise to drown out the inner voice. But emptiness cannot be filled with noise. It can only be understood in stillness. True feminine empowerment is born when a woman faces the mirror of solitude without looking away. Solitude is a harsh but fair teacher. It doesn't teach with words, but with absences. Absence of company, of validation, of noise. It's in this desert that silent strength blooms, the kind that doesn't need to prove anything, it simply exists. And the more she learns to sustain herself, the more she realizes that external support was only a crutch for the lack of self-confidence. But don't confuse solitude with isolation. Isolation is escape. Solitude is choice. A self-sufficient woman doesn't flee from the world. She observes it from a higher ground, with serenity and inner clarity. She understands that solitude is the workshop where the soul is remade, where inner wisdom is sculpted. Ignorance is running away from oneself. The consequence is living eternally surrounded, yet empty. The philosophical solution is to cultivate the habit of introspection, to set aside moments for silence, for nothingness, and allow everything to be born from it. The woman who masters the art of solitude discovers that there is no greater strength than inner peace, and those who have peace don't beg for presence. They choose companionship. And you, have you ever stayed silent long enough to hear what your soul is trying to tell you? We live in a society that demands a woman be everything at once: strong, sensitive, productive, beautiful, empathetic, calm, and still able to smile amid chaos. It's a sophisticated trap, an invisible game where the prize is exhaustion. Socrates would say, this is the modern form of slavery. The man who does not master his desires becomes their servant. And we could adapt. The woman who tries to meet everyone's expectations loses herself. Ignorance lies in believing that pleasing the world is the same as self-love. The consequence is a silent collapse, anxiety, chronic fatigue, the feeling of being alive on the outside but exhausted within. The woman who lives according to others' expectations slowly disappears, like a candle that burns itself out trying to light the way for others. The philosophical solution begins with a simple yet powerful choice: letting go of the ideal of perfection. Perfectionism is the disguise of fear. Fear of not being accepted, of not being enough. When a woman understands this, she begins to release the weight that was never hers to carry. True emotional balance isn't about doing everything, but knowing what can wait. In daily life, this means learning to say no without guilt, to rest without feeling useless, to exist without needing admiration. It's understanding that self-sufficiency isn't isolation, but sovereignty. Those who live in peace with themselves don't need to prove anything to anyone. And here lies an uncomfortable truth. The world doesn't value the silence of those rebuilding themselves. It applauds the noise of productivity. Yet ironically, it's in silence that a woman rediscovers her feminine power, the kind that doesn't shout but transforms. A wise woman learns that fatigue also speaks. It whispers, "Come home." Not to a house of bricks, but to herself. There resides conscious love. There rests inner serenity. And you? How many times have you lost yourself trying to be what others expected and forgot to be who you truly are? We live surrounded by mirrors, but few show who we really are. They're on screens, on social media, in the showcases of others' lives. And with every swipe, a new comparison is born. Subtle, corrosive, relentless. She's prettier. She's more successful. She's more loved. In this way, a woman gets lost in what she observes, forgetting the one who observes. And if Socrates lived today, he might ask, if all your worth depends on another's gaze, who are you when no one is watching? Ignorance begins when we confuse appearance with essence. The consequence is living a borrowed life, shaped by the filter of others' desires. Each comparison is a small betrayal of the soul. The woman becomes a digital shadow of herself, seeking validation in red hearts that never fill the real one. The philosophical antidote is authenticity. To be authentic is an act of courage in an age of imitation. It's refusing the role of spectator and reclaiming authorship of one's own life. It's saying, I don't want to be the same, I want to be whole. Authenticity isn't arrogance, it's humility before one's own truth. In everyday life, this translates into small revolutions: posting less and living more, listening to the body before listening to trends, trading what will they think for what do I feel. This is true emotional freedom, not following the current, but creating your own path. The woman who truly knows herself no longer needs mirrors because she has already learned to see within, and the more she sees herself, the less she compares. Inner wisdom is not born from applause, but from the stillness of one who has learned to be enough. But there comes a moment when the mirror must be shattered, not the glass one, but the symbolic one. When it breaks, the false reflection dissolves and the true face emerges. It is the beginning of spiritual awakening, discovering that the most important gaze is the one that comes from within. And you, how many times have you looked at others' reflections and forgotten to contemplate your own light? There comes a moment when everything collapses, strength fades, words lose meaning, and silence weighs heavier than noise. It is the moment when a woman realizes there is no support, no love, no voice. Only her and the echo of her own choices. It is the bottom of the pit, the place most people fear, but which Socrates would call the beginning of wisdom. True knowledge comes when we understand how little we know. This is the point where the soul says goodbye to illusions. Masks fall, certainties dissolve, and only the naked truth remains. You have no control over the world, only over yourself. And it's in that absolute emptiness that true inner strength is born, the kind that doesn't need to be spoken because it has become essence. Here is where the woman finds herself again. Not the one the world shaped, but the one who was always hidden beneath expectations, comparisons, and guilt. She realizes that collapse is not failure, it is purification. When everything false crumbles, what remains is what is real. Seneca said, "No wind is favorable to the one who doesn't know where she's going." At the bottom of the pit, the wind doesn't blow, it listens. And in that listening, the woman understands that pain didn't come to destroy her, but to refine her. That's where spiritual awakening happens, when resistance turns into surrender, and surrender into wisdom. Then, something changes. The woman stops asking and starts thanking. She thanks for the fall, for the solitude, for the loss. Because she understands it was all that which set her free. Dependence died, consciousness was born, and what once was a wound is now a source. What if everything you believed about strength was wrong? What if true power wasn't in resisting, but in surrendering? What if, behind the pain, God, or the universe, or destiny was simply calling you home? That is the question Socrates would let echo. Who are you when everything that sustained you ceases to exist? The answer is the beginning of a new life. And you, have you ever reached that rock bottom that paradoxically became your rebirth? Share your answer in the comments. After the fall comes silence, and in the silence, the revelation. What remains after everything breaks is precisely what is indestructible. The woman, now stripped of illusions, discovers something simple and powerful. She is still here, and being here is already a miracle, like a vessel that when broken reveals its true fragility and beauty. She understands that reconstruction isn't about becoming who she was, but about becoming something new. Ignorance is trying to mend the old. The consequence is living in repetition, repeating the same mistakes, seeking the same kind of love, the same kind of pain. The philosophical solution, Socrates would say, is to learn to look at what remains, not with sorrow, but with gratitude. It's not living that matters, but living well. And living well at this point means living consciously. To start again is an act of courage. It's rising with trembling hands but steadier eyes. The woman who is reborn from solitude no longer seeks applause. She seeks peace. She understands that inner strength isn't loud. It's like an underground river, constant, unseen, yet unshakable. In practice, this means rebuilding routines, redefining priorities, caring for oneself without guilt. It means sleeping when the body asks, staying silent when the world demands opinions, and smiling without a reason. Self-mastery is born in small decisions, not in grand promises. It's curious. The more a woman knows herself, the less she needs to explain. Inner clarity replaces the anxiety of being understood. Self-love stops being a concept and becomes a practice. Eating well, speaking kindly, respecting limits. That is emotional maturity and also applied philosophy. And so the woman realizes she's not made of iron, but of light. That feminine power isn't about resisting, but about flowing. And that deep down, beginning again, is the highest form of wisdom, accepting that the fall was only the prologue to her ascension. And have you realized that starting over isn't weakness, but proof that life still believes in you? Share your answer in the comments. There comes a moment after pain and renewal when the woman awakens. She realizes she spent half her life asking for permission to speak, to feel, to dream, and suddenly she understands. No one grants freedom, it is taken. This is the most silent and powerful liberation there is. It's when a woman stops measuring her worth by others' standards and decides to live by her own truth. Ignorance is believing that freedom depends on circumstances. The consequence is living imprisoned by roles, titles, and expectations. But the philosophical solution, as Socrates taught, is understanding that to be free is to be master of oneself. True emotional freedom isn't doing whatever you want. It's not being enslaved by what you feel. It's mastering impulses, understanding emotions, and choosing serenity over reaction. In daily life, this manifests in small revolutions. Saying no to a toxic relationship, leaving a job that kills the soul, choosing not to reply when silence says more. Freedom is purposeful silence. It is the courage to stop proving anything. With time, this woman realizes she no longer needs an audience. Her life ceases to be a performance and becomes a prayer. Her presence is calm yet firm. She doesn't speak loudly, but when she does, her words echo. Her inner serenity becomes proof that when the soul finds peace, it no longer needs to fight. Here arises true feminine empowerment, not the kind of slogans, but the one born from full awareness. She doesn't compete, convince, or beg. She simply is. And to be in the modern world is the greatest act of rebellion. This is the woman who no longer asks to fit in. She expands. And without asking permission, she fills the space with authenticity, wisdom, and light. She has finally understood that self-love is the deepest form of revolution. And are you still waiting to be allowed to be free? Or have you realized that no one can stop you from being who you are? There comes a point in the journey when haste loses its meaning. After running so long for love, for recognition, for validation, the woman finally stops. And in stopping, she sees. She realizes the world taught her to chase everything but herself, that she lived exhausted, pursuing goals that were never hers. Then comes the moment of lucidity, what Aristotle would call catharsis, purification through awareness. Ignorance is confusing movement with progress. The consequence is living busy, yet empty. The philosophical solution Socrates would teach is to see with the eyes of the soul. It's when a woman learns that inner clarity is more valuable than any achievement, because a clear gaze sees what matters, the now. That clarity changes everything. She realizes she doesn't need many plans, only presence. She doesn't need applause, only peace. The wise woman understands that living isn't about control, it's about being awake. And once awake, she sees that reality is simple. It's we who complicate it. In daily life, this translates into small acts: breathing before reacting, listening before responding, being where her feet are. A mind that lives in the past is a prisoner of guilt, one that lives in the future of anxiety. But a mind rooted in the present experiences something rare: serenity. This woman now walks slowly, but with direction. She has learned that clarity is the new power, the kind of power that doesn't shout, it simply illuminates. And with that light, she finally sees what was always there: a simple yet unshakable purpose, to live with truth. And you, have you been living with haste or with purpose? For a long time, it was believed that to love was to lose oneself in another. But Socrates would remind us, love is the desire to give birth in beauty. In other words, true love is not born from lack, but from wholeness. The woman who knows herself understands this. She no longer seeks a love that saves her, but one that shares with her. She doesn't want someone to complete her. She wants someone to walk beside a soul already whole. Ignorance is confusing dependency with love. The consequence is the cycle of pain, expectations, frustrations, repetitions. The philosophical solution is to transform love into consciousness. Conscious love is not uncontrolled passion. It is serene presence. It is when two beings meet, not out of need, but out of abundance, because they have so much within that they overflow. In daily life, this means no longer measuring love by messages, gestures, or promises, but by the quality of peace it brings. Conscious love doesn't create anxiety, it creates expansion. It doesn't suffocate, it allows you to breathe. It doesn't demand, it offers. It doesn't insist, it understands. When a woman loves from that place, she no longer fears loss, because she understands that true love is not a prison. It is shared freedom. It is the union of two autonomous souls who choose to be together, not two halves who need to complete each other. Feminine power reaches its purest form at this stage. Self-love matures and transforms into universal love, the kind that doesn't depend on who stays, because it already lives in the one who feels it. And in that state of fullness, love ceases to be a search and becomes a state of being. And you, do you love to fill a void or to celebrate what is already whole within you? Share your answer in the comments. In the end, when the noise fades and the masks fall, what remains is what was always there, her. The woman who walked through pain, faced solitude, learned to be enough, and discovered she never needed salvation, only awareness. Now she is no longer the one who waits, but the one who walks. Not the one who seeks love, but the one who became love. Not the one who hides from the world, but the one who moves through it with serenity. Socrates said, "Know thyself, and thou shalt know the universe and the gods." And that is exactly what happens here. The woman who rose from the ruins understands that solitude was never punishment. It was training. Every silence was a lesson. Every tear an initiation. Every absence a push inward. Now she walks with lightness. Solitude doesn't scare her. It's her old friend. She has learned that being alone is often the purest way to be with God, with life, with her own spirit. Her presence is peace in motion. She doesn't shout, but wherever she goes, the air changes. This woman has understood the ultimate purpose. Solitude exists to reveal the divine within us. When everything external fades away, the inner self blooms, and the world, once chaotic, becomes clear, serene, comprehensible. She no longer needs certainty. She has learned to trust, and that is true enlightenment. To live in fullness, in presence, in purpose. She did not conquer the world, she understood it. And that is why she is free. And you, have you realized that solitude was never the enemy, but the portal back to yourself? Share your answer in the comments. In the end, everything comes down to one simple and therefore difficult discovery. A woman doesn't need applause, she needs silence. She doesn't need promises, she needs presence. She doesn't need love to feel whole, she needs awareness to remember she already is. Solitude, once feared, becomes the teacher. It teaches what the world never did, that self-sufficiency is not isolation, it is wholeness. That self-love is not vanity, it is maturity. And that emotional independence is not coldness, it is wisdom. Socrates would say, the soul grows when it listens more than it speaks. And that's what this woman has learned, to listen to herself. In silence, she found purpose. In the fall, she found strength. In the restart, she found peace. She discovered that true feminine empowerment isn't about fighting the world, but walking in harmony with it, with courage, serenity, and conscious love. Because the one who masters herself masters everything. If this reflection touched something in you, comment below, "I am whole," and subscribe to the channel, because the next step of this journey will take you even deeper to discover the philosophical power of self-love and the awakened mind. The next video might change the way you see yourself, because maybe what you call strength is still fear in disguise.